You've probably spent years trying to fix yourself, reading the books, doing the exercises, identifying the flaws, working on them systematically, treating yourself like a project with bugs to be patched. This trait needs adjusting. This habit needs breaking. This part of you needs to be corrected before you can finally be okay. And at some point, maybe you notice something strange about this whole approach. The fixing never quite finishes. You patch one thing and another flaw becomes visible. You work on your anxiety and then you notice your people-pleasing. You address the people-pleasing and underneath it you find something about control or fear or whatever the next layer turns out to be. It's not that the work didn't help. A lot of it probably did. But there's a specific exhaustion that comes from a lifetime spent treating yourself as something perpetually in need of repair. A feeling that you'll never quite arrive at the finished version because there's always another flaw waiting to be discovered once the current one is addressed. I want to suggest something that might sound strange at first. The problem isn't that you haven't fixed enough yet. The problem is the entire framework of fixing. Here's the distinction I want to draw, because it matters more than it might initially seem. Fixing assumes something is broken, a specific part of you that's defective, wrong, in need of correction, before the rest of you can function properly. Becoming whole assumes something different. It assumes that what feels broken is actually a part of you that's been exiled, cut off, pushed away. Not because it's defective, but because at some point it wasn't safe or acceptable to let it exist fully. These are genuinely different starting points, and they lead to completely different work. If your anxiety is something broken, the goal is to eliminate it. Find the malfunction, correct it, move on to the next problem. If your anxiety is something exiled, a part of you that learned at some point to be hyper-alert because the environment actually required vigilance, then eliminating it isn't quite right. The goal becomes different. Understanding why this part of you developed, what it was protecting you from, and finding a way to include it in your life without it running the entire show. This sounds like a small distinction. It isn't. It changes everything about how you relate to the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to fix. I want to talk about where the exiled parts actually come from, because understanding the origin changes how you relate to what you find. Think about a child growing up in a family, a school, a culture. From very early, that child receives constant feedback about which parts of them are acceptable and which parts aren't. Some of this feedback is explicit, direct instructions, direct corrections, direct praise or criticism, but most of it is subtler than that. It's in the way a parent's face changes when the child expresses certain emotions. It's in what gets attention and what gets ignored. It's in the 1,000 small signals that teach a child, long before they have words for it, which parts of themselves are welcome in the world and which parts need to be hidden. The angry child learns that anger isn't welcome, so the anger goes somewhere, underground, transformed into something else, exiled from the parts of the self that get to show up openly. The needy child learns that needing too much is a burden, so the neediness goes underground too, replaced by an exaggerated self-sufficiency. The sensitive child learns that big emotional reactions are too much for the people around them to handle, so the sensitivity gets buried under a more controlled, more managed version of the self. None of these are flaws in the original sense. They're genuine, natural parts of a person that got exiled because the environment couldn't make room for them. The exile wasn't a malfunction. It was an adaptation, a genuinely intelligent response to the actual conditions of childhood. But the parts that got exiled don't disappear. They wait. And what you experience as your flaws in adulthood are often these exiled parts, still present, still trying to find some way to exist, showing up in distorted or disruptive forms because they were never given a legitimate place to exist openly. This reframes the entire project of self-improvement in a way I think is genuinely important. If the anger you've been trying to eliminate is actually an exiled part of you that's never been allowed to exist, rather than a flaw to be corrected, then the goal isn't elimination. The goal is integration, finding a way for that anger to have a legitimate, regulated place in your life, rather than either suppressing it entirely or having it erupt in unregulated, disruptive ways when the pressure builds too high. If the people-pleasing you've been trying to fix is actually a part of you that learned very young that your needs were less important than keeping the peace, then the goal isn't to become someone who never considers others. The goal is to bring back the part of you that has needs and lets them matter, integrated alongside your genuine care for other people, rather than constantly overriding your needs in service of theirs. If the perfectionism you've been trying to eliminate is actually a part of you that learned love was conditional on achievement, then the goal isn't to stop caring about doing things well. It's to find a version of caring about quality that doesn't require constant anxious vigilance, integrated with a part of you that knows you're worthy, regardless of performance. In every case, the work shifts from elimination to integration, from treating a part of yourself as an enemy to be defeated, to treating it as an exiled piece of yourself that needs, finally, to be welcomed back. This is a completely different way of relating to your own struggles than most self-help offers. If it's reaching you, subscribe. We go here every week. I want to talk about why integration is so much harder than fixing, even though it's ultimately more effective, because I don't want to make this sound easy. Fixing has a clear, satisfying structure. Identify the problem, apply the solution, see the improvement. It gives you the feeling of progress, of control, of actively doing something about your difficulties. Integration doesn't offer the same immediate satisfaction. It requires something much less comfortable. Actually sitting with the part of yourself you've spent years trying to eliminate, getting curious about it instead of fighting it, understanding what it needs instead of just suppressing what it's doing. This means practically that when your anger arises, instead of immediately trying to manage it away, you have to pause and ask what it's actually about. What did this situation touch? What does the anger think it's protecting? What would it need in order to feel heard, rather than simply expressed in an unregulated way or pushed back down? This is slower. It's less satisfying in the moment. There's no quick technique that resolves it. It requires an ongoing relationship with yourself rather than a one-time correction. But the alternative, continuing to fight these parts of yourself indefinitely, doesn't actually work either, even though it can feel like it's working for a while. Exiled parts of yourself that are being constantly suppressed don't simply disappear because you're managing them successfully today. They tend to find other outlets. They show up in your body as tension or illness. They show up in your relationships as patterns you can't quite explain. They show up in moments of stress when your usual management strategies aren't strong enough to hold them down. The fight against your own exiled parts is exhausting precisely because it never actually ends. You're fighting something that's part of you, using resources that are also part of you, in a conflict that depletes the same system on both sides. I want to be specific about what integration actually looks like in practice because the concept can sound abstract until you see it applied. Let's take anxiety, since it's one of the most commonly fixed parts of people's lives. The fixing approach treats anxiety as a malfunction to be corrected. Breathing techniques, cognitive reframes, sometimes medication, all aimed at reducing or eliminating the anxious feeling, treating its presence as evidence that something is wrong that needs to stop. The integration approach starts differently. It asks, what is this anxiety actually doing? What is it trying to protect against? Often, when you actually sit with anxiety instead of immediately trying to manage it away, you find that it's connected to a genuine concern, even if the intensity of the response is disproportionate to the actual current threat. The anxiety developed at some point because vigilance was genuinely useful. Maybe in a chaotic household, maybe in a situation where things actually could go wrong without warning. Integration doesn't mean welcoming anxiety to run your entire life unchecked. It means acknowledging the anxious part as something that developed for real reasons, thanking it, in a sense, for trying to protect you, and then having an honest internal conversation about whether the level of vigilance it's demanding is actually proportionate to your current circumstances. This is a fundamentally different relationship to the same feeling. Instead of, I need to get rid of this anxiety, it becomes, this anxious part of me developed to protect me, and I want to understand it well enough to know when its protection is actually needed and when it's operating on old information. That second relationship tends to produce something the first one rarely does. The anxiety actually softens over time, not because you forced it down, but because it no longer needs to shout as loudly to get your attention. It's being heard, which is often what it was trying to achieve in the first place through its intensity. I want to talk about something specific that happens when people first try this approach, because the initial response is often counterintuitive. When you stop fighting a part of yourself and start getting curious about it instead, the first thing that often happens is that it gets louder, not quieter. This makes sense once you understand it. If a part of you has been suppressed for years, pushed down, fought against, denied legitimate expression, it's been waiting, in a sense, for an opening. The moment you actually turn toward it with genuine curiosity instead of immediate management, it often responds with intensity, almost like it's making up for lost time. This can feel alarming. People sometimes interpret this initial intensity as evidence that the integration approach isn't working, that they've made things worse by paying attention to the difficult part instead of suppressing it. But this intensity is usually temporary. It's the natural response of something that's been ignored for a long time finally being acknowledged. Once it becomes clear that you're not going to immediately suppress it again, that you're actually willing to listen, the intensity tends to decrease. The part of you doesn't need to shout as loudly once it trusts that you're actually paying attention. This requires patience that the fixing model doesn't ask for. Fixing promises immediate improvement once the correct technique is applied. Integration sometimes asks you to tolerate a period where things feel slightly worse before they genuinely improve, because you're finally letting something be expressed that's been held back for a long time. If you've tried this kind of work before and concluded it didn't help because things felt more intense afterward rather than less, it might be worth reconsidering whether you gave it enough time to move through that initial phase, rather than retreating back into suppression the moment things got uncomfortable. I want to talk about wholeness specifically because the word gets used loosely, and I want to be precise about what it actually means in this context. Wholeness doesn't mean the absence of difficulty. It doesn't mean you'll stop feeling anxious or angry or scared or any of the emotions that the fixing approach tries to eliminate. Wholeness means that all the parts of you, including the difficult ones, including the ones you've spent years trying to get rid of, have a legitimate, acknowledged place in your internal system. None of them are exiled. None of them are at war with the rest of you. None of them have to express themselves through disruption because they have no other way to be heard. This is different from happiness, and it's different from the absence of struggle. A whole person still experiences difficult emotions. They still have bad days. They still encounter situations that activate old patterns. The difference is in the internal relationship to all of this. Instead of experiencing difficult emotions as evidence of failure, as proof that the fixing project still has more work to do, a whole person experiences difficult emotions as information from a part of themselves that has something to communicate. The emotion is met with curiosity rather than immediate suppression. It's allowed to exist even when it's uncomfortable, because there's no civil war happening between the parts of the self that want to express something and the parts that are trying to control or eliminate that expression. This produces a kind of stability that the fixing approach, ironically, never quite achieves. Because the fixing approach is always at war with some part of itself, there's a baseline level of internal conflict that never fully resolves. Wholeness, even with all its remaining difficulty, doesn't carry that same underlying war. The conflict settles, even though the difficulty itself doesn't disappear. I want to address something that comes up immediately when people hear this. Doesn't this approach risk just excusing bad behavior rather than actually changing it? This is a legitimate concern, and the answer matters. Integration is not the same as unrestricted expression. Welcoming your anger as a legitimate part of yourself doesn't mean acting on every angry impulse without restraint. Acknowledging your fear doesn't mean letting it dictate every decision without examination. The difference is in where the regulation comes from. In the fixing model, regulation comes from suppression, fighting the impulse, pushing it down, treating its existence as the problem to be solved. In the integration model, regulation comes from relationship, understanding the impulse well enough to know when it's giving you useful information and when it's operating on old, no longer relevant patterns, and making conscious choices from that understanding rather than from either blind expression or blind suppression. A person doing this work well doesn't become someone who acts out every difficult emotion without restraint. They become someone who has a genuine, ongoing relationship with their difficult emotions, which actually produces more reliable regulation than suppression does, because suppression eventually fails. The suppressed material builds pressure and erupts, often at worse moments and in less controlled ways than if it had been acknowledged and worked with from the start. The goal isn't permission for bad behavior. It's the development of a kind of self-knowledge that makes genuine, sustainable regulation possible, rather than the brittle, exhausting, ultimately unstable regulation that comes from constant internal warfare. I want to talk about something specific that happens in relationships when one person is operating from the fixing model versus the wholeness model, because it shows up constantly and rarely gets named. If you're trying to fix yourself, you tend to also often unconsciously try to fix the people you love. The same logic that says, "This part of me is a problem to be corrected," tends to extend outward. This part of you is also a problem to be corrected. This shows up as a kind of chronic, well-intentioned criticism in relationships. Pointing out the partner's flaws, not from cruelty, but from the same anxious impulse that drives the self-fixing project. The belief that identifying and correcting problems is how things get better, applied to another person instead of just yourself. People on the receiving end of this usually feel it, even when it's delivered gently, even when it's framed as helpful feedback. There's a difference between being loved as a whole, complex person and being treated as a project that hasn't quite been completed yet. The second one, however well-intentioned, produces a specific kind of loneliness in a relationship, because some part of you is never being fully met, only the parts that have passed inspection. When you shift from fixing yourself to integrating yourself, something often shifts in how you relate to others too. If you've stopped treating your own anger as an enemy and started understanding it as a part of you with something to communicate, you're more likely to extend that same curiosity to your partner's anger rather than immediately trying to manage or correct it. This doesn't mean you stop having boundaries or stop being honest about what doesn't work for you. It means the starting point shifts from "this needs to be fixed" to "this is happening, and I'm curious about what it means," which tends to produce very different conversations and a very different quality of closeness. I want to talk about something specific that happens with the parts of yourself you're most ashamed of, because shame operates differently than ordinary self-criticism and deserves its own attention. Some exiled parts aren't just inconvenient. They're things you actively feel deep shame about. The intensity of an old rage, a pattern of jealousy you don't feel proud of, a neediness that feels embarrassing to even acknowledge to yourself, let alone anyone else. Shame creates a specific obstacle to integration, because shame's entire function is to keep something hidden, including from yourself. It's much easier to apply the curiosity-based approach to mild irritation than to something you're genuinely ashamed of, because shame produces an instinct to hide and minimize rather than examine. But the parts of yourself carrying the most shame are often exactly the parts that most need integration, precisely because the shame has kept them the most exiled, the most unexamined. the most likely to erupt in ways that feel out of your control because they've never been brought into the light enough to actually be understood. The work here is slower and requires more safety than working with milder, exiled parts. It often benefits from being done with the support of a therapist or a genuinely safe person, rather than entirely alone, because shame tends to distort self-examination when there's no outside perspective to help hold it. But the principle remains the same. The shameful part of you developed for a reason. It's not evidence that you're fundamentally bad. It's evidence that something happened at some point that required this particular response. And that response has been carrying an enormous weight of shame ever since, a weight that's actually heavier than the original behavior itself usually warrants. Bringing this into the light, carefully, with support, without rushing, tends to reduce its power dramatically. Shame thrives in hiding. It loses much of its grip the moment it's actually examined honestly, with curiosity rather than condemnation. I want to talk about the difference between this approach and simply accepting yourself unconditionally, because they can sound similar, but they're actually quite different. There's a popular idea that the answer to all this is simply radical self-acceptance. Love yourself exactly as you are. Don't try to change anything. Embrace every part of yourself without qualification. This is closer to the truth than the fixing model, but it's not quite the same as integration either, and the difference matters. Unconditional acceptance, taken to its full conclusion, can become its own kind of avoidance. If every part of you is simply accepted without examination, there's no actual relationship happening, no curiosity, no genuine understanding of what each part needs, no development over time. It can become a passive stance rather than an active one. Integration is more demanding than that. It doesn't ask you to simply accept your anger and leave it alone. It asks you to actually get curious about it, to understand its origin, to have an ongoing relationship with it that allows it to evolve over time. The angry part of you that's been integrated isn't identical to the angry part of you before the work began. It's been heard, understood, given a legitimate place. And through that process, it often changes. It might still arise in similar situations, but with less intensity, because it no longer needs to fight so hard to be acknowledged. This is different from both fixing and simple acceptance. Fixing tries to eliminate the part. Simple acceptance tries to leave it exactly as it is without engagement. Integration does something in between. It doesn't try to eliminate the part, but it also doesn't leave it static. It develops a relationship with it that allows for genuine change, just not the kind of change that comes from correction and elimination. If you've tried radical self-acceptance and found that it didn't quite resolve your struggles, that simply telling yourself it's fine to be anxious or angry or needy didn't actually shift anything, this might be why. Acceptance without curiosity tends to leave things static. The work that actually produces change is the ongoing relationship, not the one-time decision to stop fighting. I want to talk about time, because this kind of work doesn't happen on the same schedule as fixing, and that mismatch causes a lot of frustration. Fixing has a built-in expectation of completion. You apply the correction, you see the result, you move on to the next problem. This creates an expectation that personal growth in general should work this way. Identify, address, resolve, finished. Integration doesn't work on this timeline. The relationship with an exiled part of yourself isn't something you complete once and then never think about again. It's ongoing. The angry part of you that you've started to understand and integrate doesn't disappear from your life. It continues to show up in various situations for the rest of your life because it's a genuine part of who you are, not a bug to be patched and forgotten. What changes isn't that the part disappears. What changes is the quality of your relationship with it each time it shows up. Early in the work, its appearance might still feel disruptive, still hard to manage, still something you're not quite sure how to be with. Over time, with enough repeated practice of meeting it with curiosity rather than immediate suppression, the relationship becomes smoother. The part still shows up, but you recognize it more quickly, understand what it's responding to more easily, and find a way to include its information without being overtaken by it. This means the work doesn't have a finish line in the way fixing implies it should. You don't arrive at a point where you're done integrating, where every part of yourself has been fully and permanently welcomed home with no further attention required. This can feel discouraging if you're still measuring progress by the fixing model's standard of completion. But it's worth re-examining what success actually looks like here. Success isn't the disappearance of difficulty. It's the disappearance of the internal war that used to accompany the difficulty. The anger still arises sometimes, but it no longer feels like an enemy you're fighting. It feels like a familiar part of you with something to say that you've gotten better at listening to over years of practice. That's a different, and I'd argue more honest, definition of progress than the one most self-improvement content offers. It doesn't promise a finished, perfected version of yourself. It promises an ongoing, increasingly peaceful relationship with the person you actually are, including every part you once tried so hard to eliminate. I want to talk about something that happens specifically for people who've built a significant part of their identity around being someone who has done the work on themselves. There's a particular trap available to people who've spent years in therapy, read extensively about psychology, and developed real fluency in talking about their own patterns. They can, sometimes without realizing it, turn the language of integration into a new, more sophisticated version of fixing. This shows up as treating self-awareness itself as the finish line, being able to articulate exactly why you react a certain way, exactly where the pattern came from, exactly what it's protecting, and then stopping there, as if the explanation itself constitutes the integration, without actually doing the ongoing relational work that explanation alone doesn't provide. This is a subtle trap because it looks like the real work. It uses the right vocabulary. It sounds like wholeness-oriented language rather than fixing-oriented language. But underneath it, the same old pattern can be operating, treating the goal as arriving at a complete, correct understanding of yourself, rather than maintaining an ongoing living relationship with the parts of you that are still, in any given moment, asking for attention. The difference is visible in practice. Someone who has turned self-awareness into a new form of fixing can describe their anxious attachment pattern with impressive precision and still react from that exact pattern the next time it's triggered, without much change in the actual moment-to-moment experience. The explanation has become a substitute for the felt, embodied work of actually sitting with the part of themselves in real time, rather than a foundation that supports that ongoing work. If you recognize yourself in this, if you can talk fluently about your own patterns, but find that the fluency hasn't actually changed much about how those patterns show up in your daily life, it's worth examining whether you've been doing the integration work or simply collecting an increasingly sophisticated description of yourself. They're not the same thing, even though they can look remarkably similar from the outside, and even to yourself. I want to say one final thing about what wholeness actually feels like, because most of what I've described so far has been about the process, not the experience of having more of it available. People who've done significant integration work often describe a specific quality that's hard to capture in language. A sense of having more room inside themselves, less crowding, less internal noise from parts of the self fighting each other for control or attention. This doesn't mean life becomes calm in some external sense. Difficult things still happen, difficult emotions still arise, but there's more spaciousness in how those difficulties are experienced, because the difficulty isn't being amplified by an additional layer of internal conflict about whether the difficulty should even be happening. This spaciousness is, I think, the actual goal underneath everything described in this conversation. Not the elimination of difficulty, not a finished, perfected self, just more room, more capacity to hold what's actually happening inside you without immediately needing to fight it, fix it, or push it away. That room is available to you, not after you've completed some defined program of self-improvement, starting with the next difficult feeling that arises and the choice, available in that exact moment, to meet it with curiosity instead of the old, familiar urge to correct it. The next time you notice yourself in the familiar pattern of trying to fix something about yourself, correcting a flaw, eliminating a habit, getting rid of a feeling you've decided is unacceptable, pause and ask a different question. Instead of, how do I get rid of this? Ask, what is this part of me trying to do, and why did it develop in the first place? This single shift in question changes the entire trajectory of the work that follows. It moves you from combat to curiosity, from elimination to relationship, from a project that never quite finishes to a practice of ongoing, honest engagement with the actual, complete person you are, including the parts you've spent years wishing weren't there. Those parts aren't mistakes. They're exiled pieces of you, waiting for an invitation back into the whole. That invitation is available anytime you're willing to extend it. For the comments, what's one part of yourself you've spent years trying to fix instead of understand? Name it. Just naming it is the first step toward a different relationship with it. I'll see you in the next one.